Why did Israel attack Qatar? On Tuesday, September 9th, 10 Israeli jets flew through Jordanian, Iraqi, and Saudi Arabian airspace before dropping 10 missiles onto Doha in Qatar. Their target was the neighborhood where Hamas officials were meeting to discuss the recent ceasefire proposal from US President Donald Trump. It's currently unclear if there were any deaths. Israel claims they wiped out Hamas negotiators, while other reports claim that they all survived the attack. In this video, we will discuss why the attack took place and the implications of it all. Ceasefire negotiations to release the Israeli hostages and end the genocide in Gaza have been ongoing for nearly 2 years. The situation has consistently been the same. The US and Israel offer Hamas a temporary cessation in hostilities and the trickling in of food aid and medicine in exchange for the release of all the hostages. Hamas consistently rejects this offer because it is seeking a full withdrawal of IDF forces from Gaza and the permanent cessation of the genocide. Because why would they give up what little leverage they have left for only a 1-month pause in the genocide? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. So Hamas refuses to accept, and Israel refuses to accept. Despite their rhetoric of wanting to release the hostages, their primary goal is clear. They seek to fully occupy Gaza and ethnically cleanse the population from the Strip. However, despite the slaughter of children on a daily basis and the engineered famine, successfully occupying Gaza has proven difficult for the IDF. This is because the resistance forces in Gaza have miraculously managed to continue their operations. They carry out attacks on IDF troops on an almost daily basis and have secured a number of successful eliminations of genocidal soldiers. This has taken place in areas like Beit Hanun, where Israel has claimed to be fully in control several times already in the last 2 years. As IDF generals have put it, they are playing a game of whack-a-mole. The moment they turn their attention away from one area, resistance forces return and set up operations again. The second reason for Israel's struggles are the civilians of Gaza. Israel seeks to dump them into the Sinai area of Egypt, but Egypt refuses to help Israel by taking in any Palestinian refugees, as they don't want to be seen as traitors to the Palestinian cause. And even if Egypt did open their borders and take in refugees, many Palestinians remain steadfast in their desire to resist Israel by refusing to leave their land, even if their homes have been destroyed and the Strip suffers through an engineered famine. This resistance has produced a PR and political catastrophe for Israel for 3 main reasons: the hostages, the soldiers, and Israel's reputation. Because Israel refuses to end the genocide, they are unable to retrieve the hostages they claim they care about. This has angered the families of the hostages in Israel that routinely protest to pressure the government in order to end the genocide so that their family members can come home. 2. Because Hamas won't release the hostages, Israel keeps killing. While Israeli soldiers have shown zero remorse for their actions, they are still uninterested in returning to the front lines. These are young men accustomed to taking drugs at concerts, traveling to harass citizens of other countries during football matches, and doom-scrolling TikTok. So gearing up to face resistance fighters isn't an exciting option for them. Recently, Israel put out a call for reservists to return to the front lines, but many have refused out of exhaustion, laziness, and fear. 3. Because Israel refuses to end the genocide in exchange for the hostages, they keep committing war crimes, which keeps the world's attention on their genocide. This has led to a complete collapse of public support amongst Western populations, producing irreversible reputational damage that they will never recover from. So while the people of Gaza are desperate for a ceasefire, in a way, Israel is too. The clock is ticking, and they are feeling the pressure. This pressure manifests itself differently because they are a nuclear-powered state with support from the US empire, but the pressure is still real and persistent. Now, a rational state would simply compromise, release the hostages, and return to normalcy. But Israel isn't rational. They are genocidal and hell-bent on their actions in Gaza, even if it means the complete destruction of their reputation and public support amongst Western populations. Since they are not willing to compromise, they have decided to resort to a notorious tactic: killing negotiators. Their logic is simple. If the negotiators won't agree to their terms, they will simply kill the negotiators until they find the men who will agree to their terms. They did this with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and it actually worked. You see, Hassan Nasrallah refused to accept any ceasefire terms unless the genocide in Gaza came to an end. Even after all of the intense pressure put on Lebanon, he refused to agree to terms. So Israel assassinated him and several other top officials until they were able to force new leaders to agree to a ceasefire. Of course, there were other factors involved in the ceasefire with Hezbollah, but the consistent thread here is the use of violence to coerce negotiators to agree to Israel's terms. Israel also attempted this recently with Iran. In June, they assassinated high-level IRGC generals and nuclear scientists with the hopes that it would either lead to a collapse of the government or replace officials with men that would agree to dismantle their entire nuclear program and missile stockpile. This strategy did not work in Iran, however, and it likely will not work with Hamas either, as they have nothing else to lose. But the Israelis tried it anyway. What is also consistent here is the US allowing Israel to commit violence in order to obtain a political victory for Donald Trump. During the nuclear negotiations, Trump warned Iran that if they did not agree to his terms, they would suffer severe consequences. Shortly after, Israel carried out their attack on Iran. Just yesterday, Trump did the same thing, threatening Hamas via Truth Social with a final warning. 24 hours later, Israel carried out this attack on Doha in Qatar. Both threats and the use of force by Israel were attempts to secure an agreement on both Trump and Israel's terms. Now, all of this has severe implications. I would describe it as shocking, but after 2 years of continuous escalation, violation of international law, human rights, and the sovereignty of several nations, it's difficult to be surprised. However, this is still an unbelievable escalation. You see, Qatar is a major US ally. In fact, they are one of only a few nations designated with the special status of a major non-NATO ally. Qatar also houses the largest US military base in the region, and they purchase billions of dollars worth of US weapons, and they have assisted the US with its war in Ukraine by providing tons of liquefied natural gas for countries in Europe cut off by Russian energy markets. Most recently, Qatar also pledged to invest $1.2 trillion in the US economy after Trump came to visit Doha. So it is incredible that the US would greenlight this Israeli attack on Qatar. Now, there are many people speculating that Qatar knew about this attack beforehand and allowed it to happen. But as of now, it's difficult to confirm whether or not this is the case. But we'll touch on this a little bit later on in the video. Let's address the powerlessness that Qatar has as a nation. Their wealth and security is 100% tied to the United States. There is virtually nothing they could do to prevent this. You might be thinking, well, Qatar could just refuse to invest in the US economy, or they could ask the US to leave Qatar, right? But here's why that won't happen. If Qatar were to oppose US policy, it would subject them to dangerous threats in the region. Just a few years ago, Saudi Arabia threatened to invade Qatar over their differences in foreign policy. Both the Turks and Iranians came to Qatar's defense, offering to support them. But it was really the presence of the US military that forced Saudi Arabia to back off this military option. Their loyalty and their usefulness to the US provided them with security in that scenario. And their loyalty to the US also provides them with their wealth. You see, Qatar isn't wealthy because of its natural gas. They are wealthy because they are given access to Western markets so they can sell their natural gas. Iran actually has way more energy reserves than Qatar, but it isn't as wealthy due to US sanctions. So if Qatar did oppose the US, their economy would plummet and they would return to being nothing more than a patch of sand in the Persian Gulf. So Qatar is completely dependent on the US for its survival and cannot do much more than use their wealth to lobby politicians in the US, gain influence in American corporations, and produce media via Al Jazeera. That is the extent to what it can do. Now let's ask an important question that should drive home the point of Qatar's powerlessness. How did Israel enter Qatari airspace and drop bombs on their territory when Qatar has billions of dollars worth of air defenses? These same air defenses protected Qatar from Iran's retaliatory attack on US bases in the country. So why did those air defenses work back then, but not today? To understand the answer to this question, we have to explore how Qatar's air defenses actually operate. The US operates and manages its own air defenses for its naval fleet and their military base in Qatar, while Qatar has its own separate air defenses for the country's infrastructure and airspace. So there are two different systems of air defenses, one belonging to the US, the other to Qatar. These systems are separately managed and operated. The US trains the Qataris on how to operate their own air defenses. When Iran attacked the US base in Qatar with drones and missiles, both the US and Qatar produced a multi-layered air defense by working together, operating their own systems separately but in unison to intercept those incoming projectiles. So this means that Qatar, in theory, has the ability to detect missiles, track them, and then intercept them with their own systems that they paid for. So for this reason, many people are speculating that Qatar knew about the attack and let it happen. But here's where it gets complicated. You see, before a government like Qatar can purchase weapons from the US, it must go through a thorough review by the US government. The US will not sell weapons to a nation unless it directly fits into their national security and foreign policy interests. For example, the US will be a lot more restrictive when it comes to selling certain weapons to the Iraqi government because of its proximity to Iran and the influence Iran has in Iraq. If the US sold weapons to Iraq, Iran could potentially get their hands on it for reverse engineering or for important intelligence gathering. For this reason, the US is more cautious when selling to Iraq than they are with Qatar. But it doesn't just end with this thorough review. The buyer must agree to strict conditions in order to receive and operate the weaponry. In the contracts for these weapon sales, there is something known as end-use monitoring. The US will only legally allow the transfer of these weapons if the buyer agrees to only use it for national security purposes. This is the gray area the US could exploit, because the US could easily tell Qatar, you cannot operate your air defenses against Israeli jets or missiles because it technically violates the end-use monitoring section of the contract. The US could argue that Israel wasn't threatening Qatar's national security because their target wasn't really Qatari infrastructure or Qatari people. Their target was Hamas. Alternatively, the US could argue that Israel is a close US ally, crucial to US foreign policy, and the use of weaponry could threaten US interests and would violate the agreement. Now you might be thinking, who cares? Qatar's airspace was attacked. Therefore, they should have used the equipment that they paid for anyway. But it's tricky because the US still maintains an enormous amount of leverage. The US doesn't have a literal kill switch on their equipment, but they do have a combination of tools and methods that essentially form a kill switch. They could limit software or hardware crucial to the operation of the equipment, for example, to limit the capabilities or the range of the equipment. Because these systems aren't as simple as point, aim, and shoot. They operate in unison and conjunction with many other pieces of hardware and software that the US has complete control over. So the US has a number of different methods to prevent or limit the equipment, including the threat of refusing future sales to the country or cutting off Qatar from access to Western markets for their natural gas. There is a ton of pressure that the US could apply on Qatar. For this reason, whether Qatar knew about the attack in advance or not, they would not be able to exercise sovereignty over their own air defenses. This issue obviously produces concerns over purchasing US weapons. Now, all providers of weapons have strict limitations for how it can be used. In Syria, for example, the military was limited in its use of Russian-made air defenses because of Russia's relationship with Israel. And in Pakistan, Chinese-made jets are free to attack India, but would surely have restrictions if they were to be used against China or its allies. The point is, it's common for nations selling sophisticated equipment to have restrictions for how that equipment is used. But the severity of US restrictions may cause nations to think twice about purchasing American equipment and seek it elsewhere. There's also another important concern here. You see, the entire point of selling out to the US is to obtain security. What the US has just communicated to the entire region is that they will protect you from everyone except Israel. And this is a problem because Israel is truly the only belligerent state in the region that nations need protection from. So the US is essentially communicating that they will not protect you at all. So then what is the point of selling out to the US? Now, this won't produce the severing of ties anytime soon, but you have to imagine that nations like Qatar will consider jumping at new security arrangements in the region the moment the opportunity presents itself. Saudi Arabia, for example, has already purchased equipment from both Russia and China, diversifying their defense portfolio. But what are your thoughts? I like to read the comment section, so let me know what you think below. And please don't forget to support our channel with a contribution. The link to do so is pinned in the comment section of this video. Thanks, and take care.
Trust nothing. No